Hello and welcome to another episode of Albums That Turned 20 in 22. So you can see this is for December of 2002. This is going to be both the last episode of the year and the last episode of this particular series in the form that I've been doing. As you'll see from other videos I've pushed out. I was going to say I've launched, but other videos I've uploaded, I've slightly changed the way I approach this, in as much as there's now a couple of videos to replace this. This video, this series that I'm currently doing, was very much, I suppose you could call it, a horizontal slice, in that it was all a particular, year. It was all albums that were 20 years old. Obviously it was in a particular month, but it sort of went across the month. The other videos that I've been starting to put out are more vertical in nature. So, one of the new series, what it does is it just picks one album that came out in that month, and I'm doing one each week. So some months there'll be 4 videos, some there'll be 5, and it can be an album from any any decade. So, 10 years old, 20 years old, 30 years old, 40, up to, I think, 50 is where I sort of drew the mark, which is back to next year, 1973 would be the oldest albums I'll be talking about. So that was one way I addressed it. Second way is, you'll notice I've got a short that goes out at the end of the month, where I slice down vertically from 72 in 10-year amounts up to 10 years ago, and look at a particular album from that month. Well, I just show it on the screen, really. So that's what I'm going to be doing in 2023, but as you know, that's already started. But I did want to finish the year off, as I'd already started doing them. There's been 4 or 5 of these now, so I figured I might as well do December. Now, December in itself was a little bit problematic, and that's something else I wanted to address before I get on. I'm probably going to spend more time musing about the nature of the UK charts than I am about talking about the album, but that's fine. I think it's an interesting subject in itself when you're talking about December releases. So again, remember, I'm talking about my perspective, listening to the radio and listening to music in the UK at this point in time. And December for me was always a very problematic month, and there's lots of different reasons over the years why that's the case. If you go back far enough to I think it was 1989, so before the albums that we're going to be talking about were released, one of the big problems with Christmas time was a lot of the time the album charts would get clogged up with those sort of, I can't believe it's not music type albums, as I'd like to call them, the ones I mean. That's what I call music series, and all the different spin-offs. Now, they weren't the first ones. Record labels would often release compilation albums of bands that were on their record label. You would get the K-Tel series. You'd even get those dreadful albums which were actually covers of well-known songs, and then a variety of other Christmas albums as well. So that's compilation albums, which are a lot of different bands. Obviously, you've got greatest hits as well, and those were often popular things to come out. And if you go back further, then I suppose you could also argue that certain stage recordings, I'm trying to think of the best word for this really, like film soundtracks or stage show soundtracks, seem to also be very popular at Christmas as well. And what I'm getting at is a lot of that stuff squeezed out a lot of other albums. So we got ourselves in a position where a lot of bands seem to avoid, at least in the UK, releasing albums in December. And what often happened was, if there wasn't anything on the compilation front that squeezed it out, then you might find that a popular album by a popular artist that was released, say, in October and November would rise to the top of the charts. And that's important when we're talking about December of 2002, because I'll talk about it a bit more when I get to the first album. But at that point, Pop Idol had started to kick in. So we were starting to see the results of that, and I've covered that whole phenomenon in another video when I was talking about Rage Against the Machine, and how there was a campaign to stop some of the those sort of talent shows from having Christmas number ones. Well, there was also a problem in the album charts, because although in '89 they got rid of all the compilation albums for different tracks across multiple bands and different things, and put them in their own charts, what we then saw in the 2000s was a lot more of this sort of, I don't really like using the term manufactured pop artist, but I think you know what I mean. So that was a problem, and Pop Idol started in around 2001 into 2002. So in 2002 you were seeing a lot of artists that had done well in Pop Idol. Now the consequence of this is, when I came to do this year, I found that a lot of the artists I really like just weren't in the charts at all at Christmas. Or, well, I say that's not right, but there weren't any album releases from any of them at Christmas. They just completely avoided it. Funnily enough, the Christmas number one album in December was actually an album I do like, which I've covered before, which is Robbie Williams' Escapology. But that was released, as you know from a previous episode, in a previous month. So it had literally gone to number one and stayed on, I think, number one all through December as well. So the good news was it sort of squeezed a lot of other stuff out, I think. So onto my first album I want to talk about. Now, I've also decided to talk about a lot of other albums that were big at that time, which I don't really want too much to do with. There was a certain band, I suppose they were manufactured. I'm not sure who they were from at the time. I'm not even going to mention, but I sort of tend to put them in the same category as baby metal, although they're not that style of music. But I tend to stick well away from bands like that. I'll include the link I'll include the link to the charts for that quarter in my notes, and see if anybody can guess which album I'm referring to. But funnily enough, the first album I want to talk about is someone that was on Pop Idol, because I wanted to just put a place marker in here. And as I've said, I think every one of these albums are by artists or who I am familiar with, bar one, and I know about them, but I just wasn't that aware of them on the radio at that time, either because they got squeezed out or it just wasn't played that much on UK radio, except for this artist, because you couldn't escape Darius in December. So the album's Dive In. It came out on the 2nd of December. It's very much in the pop genre. The album's interesting to listen to in as much as, although Darius was a product of Pop Idol, I think he came in third after, was it Willie Young and Gareth Gates, who had a lot of chart success that year. he decided when he released his album, rather to go with the people involved with Pop Idol, he had Steve Lillywhite produce it, or as executive producer. So this was Darius's debut album. It's huge success in the UK. That's why I felt I needed to mention it, even though it's not. I mean, I do like a lot of pop music, despite my more extreme music tendencies. But the sort of pop music I tend to like is more Pet Shop Boys, a lot of electronic pop artists, and pop rock. This does have some elements of rock in it, but yeah, I mean, it just sounds very similar to other stuff that I think might be a little more to my taste. So huge success, went to platinum in the UK, charted at number 6 in the UK album charts during, as they say, those competitive pre-Christmas sales. He actually wrote all 12 songs on the album and collaborated with a number of different producers. I think Steve Lillywhite was executive producer. So this was, album number 1. And I think I'd previously mentioned that Escapeology was what kept a lot of this stuff off the top of the charts in December, because that went in at number 1 and kept everything else out of that spot. So when I put this episode together, had to listen to the Darius album, and I actually listened to all the other albums here, because I wasn't familiar with any of the ones I'm going to talk about. Again, I'm familiar with the artists. So Common Electric Circus is next up. December the 10th, alternative hip hop, album number 5. I'd love this album. I've actually seen Common live. I'm trying to remember. I know it was at the Jazz Festival in Halifax, but I'm trying to remember at that point whether he was playing as part of a collective or not. So, highly anticipated album at the time, I understand. Not as commercially successful as his previous album, but what I really like about it is when I'm listening to it, I can hear all these fusions in there. Like all these things that remind me of 70s rock and electronic and soul. So, there's stuff that just reminds me of all sorts of artists from the 70s, like Hendrix and other people as well. There's the guitar sounds wonderful on this, actually. If you like that sort of fuzzy 70s guitar sound that crops up on a lot of like non-rock records, or records that have like rock fusion, you won't be disappointed by this. So I think this was definitely my favourite of the bunch, considering I'd not listened to any of these albums before, and the only one songs I think I'd heard osmotically was the previous Darius album, because it was played, the singles were played so much on UK radio. So definitely check out Common if it's an artist you're not familiar with. Album number 5 that was. So another album, a hip hop album. Why have I got a picture of one of my cats down here? You're probably wondering. Well, this was funny. So last night, when I was listening to this on my iPad, one of my cats was chilling out with me, and I was just getting ready to go to bed, and I'd left the album playing, and I think I was on the track Silent, featuring, was it Ghostface Killer and Street Life? And the cat was just staring at the iPad, listening intently. And I think it was the voices, the interplay of the different rappers on there. And they were just fascinated by this track. And also, I think Well, they'd started it on the one before when I was sitting there, and I had it sort of resting on the sofa, and they were beside me, and they were like purring away, and then they'd actually turned round to face the iPad and was just staring at the screen. I don't know if it was the album cover which had come up, or whether, a combination of that and the music, but certainly when it got to the track Silent, they were just in the face, a bit like this, of the this is a photograph taken earlier. It's a very friendly kitty. They were just in the face of the iPad, which I thought was really amusing on that. So back to the actual album. So this one by GZA, I think it's Giza. It's pronounced Giza. I keep wanting to call it Giza, but I know it's not that. I think it's Giza. And Legend of the Liquid Sword, December the 10th, hip hop album number 4. It's named after a kung fu film, in case you didn't know. And this particular artist is a member of Wu-Tang Clan. And another one I really liked listening to this, because as you know, sometimes for placeholders, I'll often include albums in here that I'm pretty ambivalent about. But no, in fact, all of the hip hop albums I listen to, which make up the vast majority of what I locked in to talk about for December's release, to just provide some sort of something to pivot around. We're all really good and well worth a listen. I think wasn't he the first member of the group to receive a record deal for this? And there's also a connection between him and Commons, I think, project-wise. Yeah, this was also, I think, one of MCA Records' last 2 projects before they got dissolved and absorbed by Geffen Records. God's Son, Nas. So, 6th studio album, December the 13th, hip hop again. A lot of very intense subject matter in this, and emotional experiences. So this, would have been in, during his ascendancy, I suppose. 3 singles. They did well on the Billboard charts. And again, because at the time I just don't remember hearing this on the radio. I'm not super familiar with how it did in the UK charts. I know it went platinum in the US. And as we've said before, there's a bit of disparity. We've got a bit of disparity between things going platinum in the US versus things going platinum in the UK. But yeah, another album to definitely check out. But obviously be warned, the material and the language. In fact, all of these hip hop albums, I think they've all got parental advisory. Yeah. And then finally, I just wanted to slip a fellow Canadian in there. And this was Chantal Kreviazuk, I think that is. Kreviazuk, sorry. I'm really mangling people's names here again. What if it all means something? I do look these up and then try and pronounce them, and then by the time I do the video I still succeed in mangling it. 24th of December, Adult Alternative album number 3. So this was very much, I think, a reflection of personal emotions during the period leading up to its release. It's got that folk-inspired piano and guitar, and there's quite a lot of artists I like in this style, and listening through to it I did enjoy the album. I don't believe it was a massive seller worldwide. I mean, it probably did reasonably well in Canada, as a lot of local grown artists, will do. People are very supportive of Canadian bands, and obviously the Canadian artists benefit from certain rules about how much Canadian material can be played on radio, or should be played on radio. But yeah, I would have not heard this artist at all in 2002. And at that point in the UK, of course, there would have been another number of artists which would have been competing for that piano and guitar, folk-inspired feel as well. I did notice there was a few other famous artists released that in that month, but their albums didn't do particularly well and weren't that critically acclaimed, and when I looked at their UK standings, didn't do so well. Again, I'll include the links so you can sort of see what albums I missed out rather than me rattling them off. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this episode of albums that turned 20 in 2022 from December 2002. This is going to go out actually around Christmas time, probably between Christmas and the New Year. Maybe I'll just make sure it goes out on Christmas Day. So have a great end of 2022, and hope everybody has a very flourishing 2023. I will be doing the usual seasonal videos for my other interests on the channel. So, people that listen to all of my, or most of my, and watch most of my stuff, I do envisage there being, if it hasn't gone out already, a Land Ahoy video for my Magic the Gathering viewers out there. So thanks once again for watching. Bye for now, and I will catch you in one of my future videos.